Hello and welcome to FireDEV, a fireside chat with people in the industry. Today, my guest is Evan Bell. Evan, how are you doing?
I'm well. Thanks for asking.
Good stuff. So, I appreciate you coming onto the podcast. So, Evan, can you briefly introduce yourself? Tell us about your current role as director of product management at Frostbite.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. I've been in the game development basically since I graduated college in 1999. I entered as a programmer, and I've worked on a lot of games, 16 shipped titles now. Most recently, I was technical director at Bioware, um, but this opportunity to become a product manager at Frostbite um, kind of just popped up out of the blue because my predecessor in this role left the company. And they approached me because I've been working with Frostbite for years. I had even worked at Frostbite earlier as a senior engineer. So I was like, well, I don't know a lot about product management, but I know a lot about technical stuff and Frostbite generally. So I'll give it a go. I didn't know if this would be my a permanent career change. So inside of Frostbite, we have different product areas, and I am the director of a product area called Core Systems, which is some of the stuff you would associate with low-level engine, like memory management, file I/O, those types of things, in a cross-platform game engine. But it also kind of includes what would be more mid-layer, like how features that make the game buildable on Frostbite, like networking, the object model, and how levels are constructed, how things are streamed in and out for like large levels. So it's a pretty big team, and I think in terms of people count, it's just a little bit smaller than our rendering team, which is like historically been always been the biggest team in Frostbite. So my primary role is planning. We do 2 releases a year, and I try to understand the priorities of Frostbite and all the game teams that use Frostbite and build a plan of what we can do with the capacity that we have. And some of that will be finishing things we've already started, and some of it will be new stuff. We have different engagements, whether they're tactical or strategic, longer term investments. And we do a lot of support. We do a lot of interrupt driven frontline support with game teams as well. I also act as kind of a technical executive producer where I just kind of help like find if someone goes, I don't know who to talk to about this, I connect those dots and like we're trying to understand our way around this problem. Can you help us? And so we do a lot of communicating with various game teams and even internally. Frostbite itself is not a small team. So a lot of my job is just talking to people and understanding their needs and trying to get those needs met.
Okay. And just going back a bit, you said at BioWare just previously you was technical, director. What does that involve on a day-to-day basis? Because you do come from a technical background, so and you have been a programmer previously. So how does a technical director differ to like a software engineer, which you have been?
Well, software engineer, of course, is just very much I'm writing the code to get things done. A lead programmer is more tactically oriented lead. A technical director is more strategic. So they're looking farther ahead. One of the principal focuses for a technical director is to navigate risks and anticipate risks. Like, well, we aren't dealing with these risks today, but before we ship this game or before we ship this update, we will have to mitigate or navigate those risks. So that's a technical director kind of has to zoom out to the 50,000 foot level and look down and say, like, what does the whole landscape look like? And also beyond risks, they have to notice opportunities. Like, what is the opportunity if we were to improve lighting build times by 50% for the team? Like, what could we do? So the technical director might then make a strategic decision to like, we're going to pull off some engineers to invest in optimizing our lighting builds or something. This is just an example. Um, and they also might see like, when we release an update for this game, we really struggle with this part. we developed the update, but releasing it is hard. So what can we zoom into that part and focus on, like, how do we get good at this part? So the technical director usually isn't doing a lot of direct like coding. Although when I was a technical director, I did some. I liked to peel bugs off of our crashes, like our live crashes. I was a technical director of Anthem Live, and I also did lots of code reviews because the technical director also is responsible for the quality of the engineering effort.
Okay. So yeah, you said the technical director generally doesn't do much, code work themselves. How about, a lead? How much coding would a lead do versus a regular software engineer? Because a regular software engineer, for the most part, all they're doing is code. Obviously, they might be writing documentation along with it and doing some research along with it, but it's still related to the code, the coding itself.
Yeah, I usually describe this in like a like average division of time. When I was a lead for like Anthem's game development, I also before Anthem I worked on the Old Republic as a server lead. I still did quite a bit of programming then, but it was more like a 40-60 split. Um, and I'm kind of a morning person, so I would usually do my programming in the morning and meetings and like leadership type engagements in the afternoon when everyone else was around. Um, so it, whereas a technical director almost shifts entirely into like the administrative side, like spreadsheets, uh, your task database, looking at metrics like key performance indicators are a thing that technical directors have to define and have to track and have to define what the action is if those things aren't where they're supposed to be. Like one thing that a live service technical director would be very concerned with is mean time between failure. What is the how often does your game crash, whether it's on the server or the client? And what number should that be? Oh, well, it should be zero, but like they want to see that number going down if it's on internet's an unacceptable place.
Okay. And all of the companies that you're working for, they're all owned by EA Games. And so one, what have made you stay at effectively EA for so long? And two, because you jumped around in EA, including Bioware, where you went, and then you went away from it, and then you went back to Bioware. How is that process for jumping around, these different studios and organizations within EA? Is it a pretty simple thing, or do you have to effectively go through some major recruitment process again because it's a different, section of it?
Um, so just to be clear, I haven't spent my entire career at EA. I was 9 years at an independent developer in Austin, Texas, that is now, I believe, defunct, called Edge of Reality. We did cross-platform console titles. The second part of my career has been all at EA, and what you're describing is what we call internal mobility. EA is actually very supportive of internal mobility. It is a way to do different things and grow your career and kind of grow the scope of what you've seen and done. So inside of EA, I started out at a studio called Pogo working on small download titles because I had gotten tired of working a lot of overtime to make like a like a console game that wasn't going to really be up to the quality I would wanting to see. So I started at Pogo, but at that time, social games were starting to take off, and Pogo was experimenting with it. And at the end of this experimental phase, they said, like, we're going to go do Flash games on Facebook. And I'm like, I'm not writing Flash for a living. So I applied at Bioware in Austin, which at the time was working on the Old Republic. And you apply to open roles just like anyone else. We do have some rules, like you're not supposed to apply for a role unless you've talked to your manager. um, and if you've applied for a role, that's the first question they should ask you is like, have you talked to your manager that you've applied for the role? Um, and so I applied over there, and they interviewed me just like they would interview an external candidate. And and you should expect that you're competing with external candidates too, because they're going to be trying to get people in. We have our own internal recruiters that try very hard to match people to open roles. So you interview, and if you get the gig, you specify a start date, and you go, and that's your job. And you maintain like everything else that you would expect for staying at the same company, like your paid time off, your retirement accounts, like all those things just kind of stay the same because those are all EA wide. Um, those only will change if you change major geographies, which I did do because I worked on the Old Republic until it launched. And then I applied for a role to work on the physics team in Sweden for Frostbite. And when Frostbite was just starting to be used for non-Battlefield games inside of Electronic Arts. At that time, Frostbite was about 54 people, and to work there, you had to live in Stockholm. So I applied for that role, and I successfully interviewed for it, and we moved to Sweden. And that's when some of those other things changed, like your time off changes, your benefits change. Like in the US, a big part of your benefits is like your health insurance. But since Sweden has a nationalized system, we use just Swedish healthcare when we lived there. Uh, and the on the flip side, when I went back to Bioware, also my relocation was covered. I should have mentioned that. Like the international relocation was a part of the role, and I got the same international relocation package that an external candidate coming from North America would have received. So it's quite a robust relocation package. It was, and they help you find an apartment. They did everything. So worked there for 2 years. Started talking to Bioware again because at the time my kids were about a year and a half. They were going to just had their second birthday, and we were worried about quality grandparent time and being that far away. So I was looking at roles outside of EA, and there was a role opening up on a team that was ideating an early RPG title at Bioware. So I went to work for them again because I had good relationships with all of them. I didn't like leave in a huff or anything. Um, and from then, I worked on some titles that didn't make it out. I worked on Shadow Realms, which was canceled. I worked on some patches for Dragon Age 3. And then I worked on the Old Republic again and worked on one of the coolest updates to that game called Knights of the Fallen Empire, which has an awesome trailer. If anyone has seen it,
All their
some of
trailers are so amazing. Their trailers are better than most of the movies. Their trailers are so good for the Old Republic.
yeah, they're it's brilliant. Like as a father of twins, that trailer contains like this the twins that one kills the other. It's like oh, that hits you right in the feels. Um, so I worked on the Old Republic for 6 months, mostly focusing. I was a server lead, mostly focusing on optimization because we had our own infrastructure. Like this is before the cloud. That game launched before the cloud was really a thing. So we had purchased our own data center and infrastructure, and so every amount of CPU time we could save on the servers was dollars and cents for the business, and it also improves the experience of the players. Slow processes lead to perceived latency for massively multiplayer games. Um, so I worked on the Old Republic and then went to work on Anthem. I was the first person in Austin to work on Anthem, and I worked on Anthem for 5 years until Bioware decided to discontinue development of Anthem. And um, I worked some on Dragon Age 4, um, which has been called Dreadwolf, and uh, but I wasn't. They had their own technical director, so they didn't need another technical director on the project. So I was kind of like a lead without a project at that point, and I had just been doing some very close work with Frostbite related to some unreleased games, and as a just like keep Evan busy type work. And because that was going well, Frostbite approached me about the director of product management role. So I applied for that role, um, and I've been in there since November 2021.
Okay. Dragon Age 4, obviously will be the latest title in a beloved franchise. When can we expect, Dragon Age 4?
I can't comment on that.
Like, how far are we into development? Are we, if not specifics, any new announcements coming up for Dragon Age 4?
You can look at the Bioware blog for all announcements related to Dragon Age 4.
Okay. And you mentioned cancellation. You worked on a game that got cancelled. How does that feel when you've been working on a title that gets cancelled? Because yeah, I know it is just it is a job. You still get paid. It's not like it's your own, let's say, starter where you're making something, you cancel it, you make no money from it, but it still must hurt.
I'm definitely in the it hurts camp. There's like I've read a lot online where people have kind of what I would consider a more mercenary attitude about it, where it's just like whatever, it's a sunk cost,
I,
you
I've
know.
heard that before from a couple of people, which I was surprised by. But
The thing is, nobody works in game development. Well, at least I hope they don't. That aren't somewhat passionate about the medium, right?
mm,
So and if you're lucky, you're working on a game that you yourself care about, right? So to have that canceled, like you had this idea, you're working on this thing, it's in this very nascent form. It's not there yet. You know it. You know it's a long road to get it to make it a thing, to make it a game that matters. And then to have it canceled, especially if you felt like the development was going fairly well, that hurts. And there should be a grieving process. You should like commiserate with the other developers and you know bond over that shared time together because it can hurt. That being said, games often do get canceled for the right reasons.
hmm
um, if a game just isn't it can be a mercy killing, honestly, because sometimes games can enter development hell. That is that label is often applied to film, like a project that just can't get made is in development hell. Uh, we are we'll just cancel games that are in development hell, and I think it's the right thing to do if there's no clear way to get it out. Um, and some games are effectively canceled in place where they're like reset, like okay, well we're going down the wrong path, we're going back to square one. That's not a true cancellation because you're like we're still going to develop something that is kind of this idea or in this intellectual property, um, but we're way off track, so we need to back up. Um, and like a fairly public example of that was Metroid Prime 4, which was being developed at a studio in Nintendo, which rarely comments on cancellations. Said it wasn't going well, and they had already announced it, so they felt obligated to announce its cancellation. Um, I feel like games, it's better if they get canceled early, like
hmm
strictly from a dollars and cents perspective, and also just for the sake of the game team. Um, if the idea isn't working, if you don't see it tracking, or if you can't hire for critical roles, or whatever the reasons are, um, then it's better to do it early and like avoid the sunk costs. Um, but I get it when you're excited about an announced title that's canceled as a game fan. That's like you're like, oof, why did they do that? There's often a lot of kind of like assignment of blame for cancellations. So as someone who's worked at EA forever, it's always EA's fault. General perception of the public is studios good, EA bad.
Yeah.
So if it was canceled, it was clearly EA being EA in EA bad mode, and that's not always the case. I'll just say that lots of things get weighed. Studios sometimes recommend like we actually think we should cease development and put all our eggs in a different basket, and like capitalize on a different opportunity instead of doing this. And as a fan, if you're like, oh, I just wanted to play that game though, like you don't care about, you probably haven't even heard about the opportunity because it's probably unannounced. So it that can you can be painful from the other side to be like, I was looking forward to that, and then now it's never coming out.
Oh yeah, and with games that get cancelled, there will be obviously various stages of development, from just having a few discussions to all the way being almost ready for release. So just as let's say active titles that are being worked on that aren't released yet to the public, internal employees will probably have some sort of process of being able to play them. Is there some sort of internal process of being able to play games that didn't get released but got cancelled, but were very playable? Is that like a
Uh,
reward almost? Is there anything like that in EA?
well, there's no like library of playable games that didn't get released. In that sense, we do have the opportunity to play each other's games before they launch. It's
Okay.
not uniform, and it's based on the studio's willingness and ability, like having time to set up a playtest, that kind of thing. But we do them. It's actually a great opportunity to get more people playing your game before you go out to a wider, like, non-public test. So that's ideally a game is playable early in development, gets played often, and a big as big as an audience as the studio could tolerate can will play it. And then those we do those internal play tests, and we get lots of great feedback. Game developers give some of the best feedback for like bugs and for what their experience was like. So I think it's an opportunity inside of EA that, as long as you're not, you have to weigh that against secrecy though, because a big company is leaky. Unfortunately, I wish we were better about like maintaining our secrecy. We so we have mixed success in that. So as soon as you invite a broader group of people to an unannounced title, that is one of the risks that studios have to weigh. But I think in a lot of cases, getting that super valuable feedback into time when you can action that feedback usually exceeds the risk, unless there's a business risk. Like if you're working with a partner, like some big movie studio or some IP holder, where it's like, no, it has to be absolutely kept secret that you're working on this, then it gets more difficult. But you can still do internal playtests. Studios themselves are large and have hundreds of people working at them, so you can still get hundreds of eyes on your game.
Okay. And when the Frostbite engine launched back in '08, with Battlefield Bad Company. For the first few years, it was just in games that were first person shooters. Battlefield, Medal of Honor, and now it's what in Plants vs Zombies, FIFA. The golf games, Need for Speed, obviously FPS, RPG, like Mass Effect, that sort of stuff. Like, was that always the plan with Frostbite, that we're gonna create this engine, Battlefield, let's Medal of Honor will be the test bed, but we'll ideally want to expand it out to so many other genres, or was that just kind of serendipitous and it was a surprise?
My understanding is it was more an opportunity that was taken as opposed to the plan. But I'm not 100%. I wasn't there at the birth of Frostbite, and I wasn't a leader at DICE. Frostbite was an invention of the DICE studio to support their titles. And after Battlefield 3, which really struck a chord, I think it was a super successful game. It looked great, and it featured destruction like people hadn't seen before.
Oh yeah, especially for, I mean, even today you don't see widespread on that level, that sort of destruction. Yeah, you get better destruction when when it's actually done in a game. But yeah, like the fact that you could take down buildings, it definitely was amazing for the time.
Yeah, so those things got noticed, and at the time, EA just had a bunch of different internal engines and also licensed engines. Like Bioware had its own engine that the original Dragon Age Origins was launched on. The Old Republic had a different engine. which was a licensed engine, a bunch of internal tech. Visceral had their own engine. Need for Speed had their own engine. They all had their own. The sports titles had a bunch of shared libraries, but there was no like kind of single sports engine either. Um, and like famously, like the original Dead Space used the engine that was used for PGA at the time, the golf game. Um, so there was a lot of just like a lot of reinvention going on across the company. And there's this kind of expression I like for big companies. It's like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So someone could be like, I'm going to create this awesome new dynamic lighting algorithm. And someone on the other side could do exactly the same work, but in a different implementation. But largely, we were inspired by the same SIGGRAPH paper and went off and wrote our own thing. And I don't think that's necessarily 100% bad. Like, I think as a looking at a spreadsheet, if you were a CFO, you're like, why did we spend $1 million twice to do the same thing? But um, there might be local uh, realities that affect the software development there. Anyway, I digress. Uh, the important thing is it looked great. It did things people hadn't seen before. It supported multiplayer, um, and it kind of just turned into like an opportunity that the EA was willing to say, like, okay, we're going to internalize, we're going to move all Frostbite. Well, it didn't at first. It wasn't. We're going to move all engines to all games to Frostbite. It was we are going to allow teams that are not DICE to use Frostbite. And at that time, Frostbite became its own business unit, kind of like a studio. But really, what kind of cemented it, I think, was when the sports completed their evaluation and decided to migrate FIFA, which is now called FC, over to Frostbite, followed by Madden. And there has been a multi-year project that we're just seeing the end of, actually, because NHL is now on Frostbite, as well as uh, we're just wrapping up the last sports title. I think it launches this year as transitioning to Frostbite.
Okay, and how does the Frostbite team, accommodate all that? Because one of the things that you get when you have an engine and you try to use it for a bunch of different, titles, they can sort of kind of feel the same. It's like I'll see a game announcement and I'll see and I'll just know that it's made in Unreal. Like Unreal has a certain feel to it. Unless you do a lot of modification, but there's plenty of titles you just see them and you're just like that's definitely an Unreal game. So like how the because obviously you got FIFA, you've got golfing, kind of similar because it's sporty, but then you got racing with Need for Speed, then you got Plants vs Zombies, totally different. You got FPS, you got RPG. How does Frostbite accommodate that to make sure, FIFA doesn't just, kind of end up feeling like it is made in a Battlefield engine?
Well, we didn't do destructible stadiums in the first one. We probably didn't want to represent the worst sides of football. So the shortest answer to that question is because the teams have all of the code, they are free to modify it. And for like the stadium sports titles, one key differentiator they have to have for their games is a forward renderer because they need to have really crisp lines and readable jerseys that have names and numbers on them. And a deferred renderer, which is typically used in your FPS scenario for high detail like environments and lighting, um, they they alias more. So it's not appropriate to do a stadium sports title with a zoomed out kind of television perspective camera. Uh, it would be very swimmy and you'd see a lot of aliasing artifacts. So that's one example. Um, so we have a process like teams can modify the code as they see fit. They can ask for help doing it. They can ask us to make a change to the engine that is like, we would really like to see you do this. Uh, and we put that in plan or we do it on their branch and we take it back to the engine. There's all sorts of ways that this happens. So all of these genres contribute to the whole, and some of these teams maintain um, what we internally call divergence, which is like they've changed the engine because they thought it was necessary to do so. But that's difference from the main line where we do development of Frostbite. Ideally, we want to be able to support all the genres with no divergence. That's where we want to be because there's a cost to having all this difference. And we're kind of losing the more changes they make, we're kind of losing the value of having a central technology. So we're always trying to drive that down and kind of meet them where they're at and make it so that those things that those modifications just can live as a part of a high quality part of the engine, and then any game team can use it. Um, they also have the ability to extend the engine through this mechanism we call extensions. It's not the same, exactly the same as a plugin, because a plugin kind of implies a really crisp plugin architecture and interface. But you can make an extension that adds an arbitrary feature that can have its own support in the editor and its own support in the runtime. Um, and game teams have done a lot of that. When we were at Bioware making RPGs, we had to make the conversation system, for example. Bioware, it's like a hallmark of Bioware games is that you have a narrative that's delivered through conversations. And Bioware had to create a conversation system that is built on top of the general cinematic support inside of Frostbite. But the general
Okay.
cinematic support inside of Frostbite actually came from the first Bioware games, what we call our timeline, which is for cinematics, that was invented to support RPGs that have to have conversations and also like a non-interactive story moments.
Okay, and those sort of trailers that like the Old Republic has, like, is that done in house or is that outsourced? And how much expense is actually made on those trailers because they look pretty costly.
Well, I don't know what they cost. I do know the Old Republic trailers were made with an external studio. Um, but there's some asset sharing. Like for Knights of the Fallen Empire, some of the assets the external studio made, they were down-resed to be used in the game because games mostly can't. Well, maybe now on like Gen 5 and like high-end PCs can start to use some dense assets, but still we'll have to remove polys and stuff. Um, but we also have internal. We also build cinematics internally. So a cinematic or a movie sequence inside of the game itself is usually built internally, although outsourcing could be involved for animation. Um, and we also do marketing videos. Whenever you see like, this was recorded in engine, um, that's effectively a movie made inside of the engine, but then, turned into an MP4 and shared on the internet. Um, those are done internally as well because they usually require Frostbite expertise to actually to make them. So it those would be more difficult to outsource.
Okay, and because Frostbite is used on so many EA titles, on so many EA studios, is it actually compulsory now to, if you're an EA studio, to use Frostbite? And like a, follow up question to that, if it is compulsory, or even if it isn't, if they're requiring, let's say, a new studio which will be using some other engine, what's that sort of process of trying to get them onto Frostbite or onto the EA, technology stack effectively?
So it's not compulsory; it's opt in. Uh, if you're making a multiplayer game at EA, you do have to support. You do have to plug your game into the EA Player Network. That's compulsory, but that's not a part of Frostbite. Um, that's we have central tech that is not Frostbite. So um, like matchmaking, we have a matchmaking service internally. Like that's not a Frostbite technology.
Okay.
So it's not compulsory. We have like a game team kind of approach us. Like mostly, most studios at EA are purchased, although we do create studios internally. But if we purchase a studio that was doing its own thing with its own technology or using a licensed engine, like they're open to approach us, and we will always have conversations with them about like what is your technical strategy, what is your roadmap like, or how do you feel like your needs are currently met by your current technology plan? Those types of things. So it's more of like an invitation. Um, we also couldn't afford, like, if EA went out tomorrow and bought 10 studios, um, there's no way we could accommodate 10 teams coming onto Frostbite at the same time. Like, the team isn't. There is a kind of capacity cost supporting that many teams. So we would we'd have to grow that slowly if that kind of thing happened. We couldn't all roll everyone over at once, even if that was the intent to be there. Because we can't risk our current customers to support like new customers, and new customers will require a lot of support because um, Frostbite being an internal engine, we aim to have a good out of box experience, but we don't have the same level of documentation and stuff that like Unity and Unreal enjoy. You can just go on, you can spend hours on YouTube learning about the other engines, right? Like, we don't have that many resources. We do have resources, but there's a lot of hands on support to have a team like move on to Frostbite.
Okay. And is Frostbite ever gonna be, released for anyone to use, just the way you can go and use Unity, Unreal, CryEngine, Codecast, these sort of stuff, or licensed?
Um, I don't believe so. And if that were the case, I couldn't comment on it anyway.
I mean, has
So
there ever been any like interest or discussion in doing it? Because I can understand when it's only on a couple of games, that, but when it's this widespread, clearly, it's doing well and it's got something about it. Uh, I would think, from a big big company, they might think, okay, this could be another, avenue for making money, or broadening the brand.
um, all the conversations I participated in this have been highly speculative. But in terms of the brand, like, I don't only think a company the size of EA would invest in like externalizing the engine if they thought there was a strong business case to do it. Like, what's the business model? Is this a compelling source of new revenue for the company? And also, they would have to strike a balance between, can we do that and still support our internal studios, or is really the mandate of Frostbite, would it be watered down by going external? Um, so I think that uh, a lot of things would have to line up, and there'd have to be a clear business case to do it for it to happen. Also, I think the studio, we would need to grow the team, like, to have kind of this external facing support infrastructure that all big middleware providers have. They have a ticket system, they have their own Slack, they have support engineers, those types of things. Like, that would all you couldn't just like plop Frostbite on GitHub and say, like, send us a
Imagine
hundred
that.
thousand dollars and good luck. It wouldn't work. Like,
Yeah.
people would poke around with it for sure, but I think there would have to be. I also think there would probably have to be something unique to the business model that doesn't currently exist with like Unreal and Unity. Something more akin to what uh, like some of the newer, something newer that Unreal has done with the Fortnite, Unreal for Fortnite. Like, I think um, they that's really cool. That it's a different business. It's not the same as just like licensing it to studios. It's like more like directly putting it in the hands of players and creators inside of Fortnite, and Fortnite has become its own development platform in a sense. Um, but I can't really discuss this anymore beyond what I've said, because it's, if we had plans in this way, I wouldn't be at liberty to discuss something that isn't announced.
Okay. And Frostbite, what sort of language and tech stack do they use?
Well, the runtime is C++, and it's some of the core original Frostbite technologies that have evolved over time. It is built on some older EA technologies, like the EASTL, which is open source. You can get it on GitHub. It's a software template library. Uh, for many years, especially coming out of like the early console generations, um, the STL, which part of C++ was, had some liabilities for game development that the EASTL what aimed to correct or avoid entirely. There's a white paper that you can read on this by one of the original authors of EASTL. So that's like common to not just Frostbite, but some other EA tech and many teams, even teams that don't use the Frostbite engine, use some of those lower level libraries. And
Okay.
then there's an older animation technology. Well, I don't want to say older as in not like aging, but it kind of actually predates the existence of Frostbite, called Ant, which is Frostbite's animation system, and it is now merged and is part of Frostbite. But it was its own standalone animation tool, and I think this is one area where Frostbite actually, as a technology suite, really excels. Is this animation studio? Uh, it's very powerful. I mean, think about all the needs for animation of a sports title. Just a sports title would have like FC, and it supports that and a whole bunch of other genres. And it's been in development since I believe the early 2000s. So that's one thing that is kind of predates Frostbite, is now kind of part of it.
Okay. And you mentioned the game Anthem that you worked on previously. That came out in 2019, and then the servers were shut down in 2021, and support for it was shut down.
I'm sorry,
It
they're not shut down. They're
what?
not. There's just no updates.
Oh, okay, okay. So sorry. So there's no updates for Anthem. Why did that happen? Obviously, it wasn't obviously doing the best. But why do you what happened with that game? Do you think? Because there was a lot of hype around it. I remember seeing the trailers before it came out, and I thought this looks like a very interesting and exciting game. And then I felt like just before you knew it, there was like, okay, sport is dropped.
Um, so I can't comment on this too much because this is like down to internal business decisions that both Bioware and the EA made. Uh, but what I can say is, if Anthem had 1 million players in 2021,
Mm-hmm.
they wouldn't have 1 million like monthly active uniques. They would not have discontinued development. Right? Um, but it is it's actually a frequent thing with live service games for them to come out, have a fairly kind of head of steam with the hype, and Anthem certainly had that,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and then to have some struggles after launch. This is kind of a repeated pattern we've seen, and some studios have gone to the extreme of actually turning them off, like they did with the Final Fantasy 14, was it? Um, and then like going dark for like a year and a half and then relaunching. Others usually just struggle for a while. I think a good one is like No Man's Sky. Well, I don't think they had a lot of technical struggles. They had more of a engagement struggle, like
Mm-hmm.
keeping players interested. But they kept investing and they kept on it, and now it's kind of blossomed into what it is today. And there's always the option that then just gets to discontinue development. Like, well, what do we see of our chances of success of like kind of navigating the rough spot, and in reacquiring players and getting new players and balancing that against other investment opportunities. But suffice it to say, if Anthem had had the success of Apex, it would still be in development for sure.
Okay. So you said that the support has, stopped, but the servers are still up and running. Like how does that sort of discussion go down? Because sometimes the servers for some games, get shut down. Like, what do you talk about? What do you discuss to decide? Okay, we'll stop support. We're not going to be actively developing on it anymore. No updates, but we don't want to shut the servers down. And like, at what point do you say, this is obviously it's costing money, so it'll be costing resources, and like, when do we actually shut it down?
Well, it's always done on a case by case basis. Um, so, like, probably the game that shuts the most servers down is FIFA, because they have this long tail of all these titles they support, right? But they have to decide like how many years past will we support um, you know, FIFA 2007. Like, I'm pretty sure that one isn't supported, but I would have to actually check. But like some titles stay around just because they have this critical mass of enough players. Like you can play Mass Effect 3 multiplayer still today. Um,
Hmm.
so that is, it's really just done on like, and what that critical mass is for each game is it's specific to the realities of running that game. Like how much engineering support does it require? How much of as an investment is it? Is it largely automated? A lot of games can be like someone's just like minding the dials and they look for something to turn red and then they only intervene if something breaks. So, but they might not be getting updates, but everything's working smoothly and it has enough players. Will keep it running. We're never trying to disappoint people, but it is kind of like when it's down to like well below that critical mass, people go, okay, we've stopped investing in it. This is kind of at its end of life. It What never happens though is it never drains to zero of players, and then we turn it off. So there's always some disappointment. There's somebody out there still playing it and enjoying it who's
There
disappointed.
always is,
Yeah,
even though there's hardly anyone on there. There's always
yeah,
somebody. There's always that die-hard, that die-hard set of fans, that little community that is playing it like 10 years later, and they just want to play that. They don't want to play the new thing.
yeah. And this happens, and like I kind of wish, and I wish this beyond um, EA as well, is if there was an engaged community, if you could hand the keys to the server to them. There's all sorts of reasons why this isn't practical in many cases. But if it could be community run, that would be cool. If some titles could be turned into community run, that rarely happens. If it's a title that has kind of a business relationship behind it, like a FIFA game, that wouldn't be possible because the licensing requirements like probably prohibit like a fan run service. Um, and that's just a contractual obligation that like the developer and the publisher, they couldn't violate that contractual obligation.
Yeah, of course not. So, one thing I've always wondered with these sort of online titles that, stop support and then, eventually stop the servers is why don't they go for, because a lot, they go for a dedicated server approach. Why don't they go for a dedicated server approach with a peer to peer, fallback? So that way you get the benefits of dedicated servers, but when you shut them down, you could still play. If you wanted to, however, good it may or may not be, using a peer-to-peer system.
Um, well, matchmaking is probably the number one reason that it's not possible, even if a title supported that. So um, it's technically possible. One reason I don't think it's done in practice, unless the main game needed peer to peer and dedicated servers in some kind of hybrid arrangement, it's a lot of testing and a lot of, you would have to make the game work as well or as close to as well as possible in both setups. And
Hmm.
multiplayer games with a single setup are very hard to make and very hard to make work well and have a compelling and consistent user experience without kind of like all the things people are used to seeing in multiplayer games, like corrections and lagginess and characters popping around and results that don't match their expectations. Uh, those have different. The way you solve those are different for a dedicated server game and a peer-to-peer game. So you just be increasing your problem set a great deal to try to ship a game like that, unless that hybrid mode um, was beneficial to the game itself. Like the game model, whatever the simulation the game does, really needed it. Um, it would be hard to justify that kind of like development cost. What is easier though is letting people host their own servers. Like, and this used to be quite common, like Quake servers and Battlefield 1942 servers and stuff. Like there were community run servers, so that's much easier to support um, because you're not changing the networking model to something two different flavors. You're just giving empowering people to run the dedicated servers.
Okay. And previously, you mentioned that you worked in the USA, you worked in, Sweden as well. What was the sort of cultural differences in, game development? Like how did that differ?
Um, well, there are some differences to all business from America to Sweden. So one big example is like parental leave benefits for people starting families. Uh, Being a Nordic country, it seems like the Nordic countries are in a competition for who has the best parental leave benefits. And compared to America, where there is no nationalized standard and they can be quite poor to non-existent, uh, it's amazing, uh, and it is a great place to raise kids. So, if you're in the EU and you have freedom of movement, you want to have kids, move to Denmark, Sweden, or um, if your country doesn't have comparable benefits, is one suggestion I would make. So that has a profound impact on business culture because people take on parental leave and they go away for months, like 6 months. They can go away or more. So the companies have to be able to metabolize that. It's a normal thing. It happens quite frequently. So the way I saw this being handled is people would get covered by contractors. So people earlier in their careers would come in to support that role. So it's kind of a part of how people get started in their careers is by supporting folks on parental leave. Either coming in to just support the team generally and someone more senior takes the reins of someone who's out, or if it's a more direct match of skills, they come in and just directly fulfill that position. I think that's different. There's some things that aren't different, like you can still work a lot of overtime, at least back then. Shipping a game is hard. That wasn't any different. Uh, it is, some things are different strictly because of geography, though. And probably aren't noticed by Swedes, but was noticeable to me when I worked there, is the light changes quite a lot. Since you're 7 degrees off the Arctic Circle, the light goes down at like 3 p.m. So it looks like darkness outside. It will feel like you're working overtime when you're working a regular 8 hour day because you go to work in the dark and go home in the dark. Um, and there is some different, like December is kind of like a month long party in Sweden. There's lots of eating of sweets and commiserating and um, drinking that happens uh, to get through that darkest month. Um, so that's noticeable. Fika is a really big thing in Sweden. I'm sure a lot of people outside of Sweden have heard of it. This is the coffee break that happens in the afternoon. It's a verb in Swedish, and it's like we're gonna go do this thing. It's usually like have a snack and have some coffee, have a chat, um, and I think it's a delightful tradition. I have this anecdote I like to tell people when we were working um, in a group of workstations. The power got cut because they were taking too much power. All the workstations shut off at the same time, and the team that was sitting in that area just stood up at the same time and said "Fika," and they went to have coffee while the IT team tried to get their computers back up.
I think the IT team should have said it first, Fika, and then they should have gone. Yeah, imagine that. So yeah, because you jump around different studios within the year, or you have that possibility. It, is that always only a personal choice, or can it be, oh, this particular studio, this project needs some engineers, we're ramping up, there's needs some extra help, we're moving you around. And if that is the case of it's not always your decision and they'll you'll get moved around, how does that make you feel on a personal level when you might be engaged in a particular project, enjoying it, having fun with the team, and then suddenly you're being sent off to a different project?
I'm glad you asked. So this isn't done on a coercive basis. Like we don't just force people to go work on a game. Um, Usually it's done in a way like this studio really needs help. They There's no way they could ramp up this many staff, even if they had the headcount to hire that many staff in that period of time. A good example from fairly recently was the Squadrons game. Uh, a portion of the Anthem team went to work on the Squadrons game with Motive uh, to help final it in the last 6 months. And this was basically we were trying to like we were like, do we need this many people to work on Anthem Live? We need this many people to work on Help Motive, and we need this many people to work on Dragon Age. Like, and we just kind of tried to match people to where their interests were. And sometimes you can't get it 100%. Some people, we avoid putting someone in their last choice. Like that at that time, there were three choices, and this is just how Bioware handled it. But like we routinely have engineers at least float around, and sometimes content creators as well, that like can like when they're not particularly busy in their own studios, go to help other studios ship their games. That's one benefit from being on a shared technology, is that Frostbite expertise is transferable, so you can go and help another team ship their game. That's pretty common practice.
Okay. And, with EA, I'm sure you're aware, EA gets a lot of hate sometimes. Like, what's your opinion on that? Like, and why do you think EA personally gets a lot of hate? I feel like EA and Ubisoft are probably the two biggest hated, companies within the gaming industry. Correct me if you, think otherwise.
Well, there certainly is lots of colorful feedback. I do think that there is a strong temptation to suspect nefarious goals or intentions when the publisher and the studios really just aren't perfect. Like they are really trying. Um, I think it would surprise people to understand the amount of leeway studios have inside of EA to um, hang themselves on their own shoelaces, essentially. Like EA used to, like long before my time at EA, would like acquire a studio, turn it into EA something name, and run it for a few years and close it. That would seem to be the pattern. That's certainly not the case anymore. But like if a game doesn't come out to someone's expectations or gets delayed or canceled, there is often it's just because EA is greedy. That's the common one. It's like, well, it's a public company. They are actually compelled to grow the business. That's their mandate. It is a for-profit business. It's not a nonprofit. Not a lot of giant AAA games being made on a nonprofit basis by anyone. And I also think that it's fair to criticize game publishers for decisions you don't agree with. What I don't like is when people are making claims for which they don't have any evidence. And um, I see this a lot. You'll see this like on comments on like Kotaku articles or whatever. People are saying, "Well, EA only did this because of blah." It's like you don't know that. Like I work here and I couldn't even say that. Or sometimes I do know that that is definitely false, and it's like, but that's internal. I can't comment on it. Like so, you're just like people are just on there on the forums saying stuff, but they don't have any evidence. In general, I think everyone on the internet who makes claims without evidence should be challenged. The internet would be a healthier place if everyone was going like, "Well, how do you know that? Do you have any evidence that supports this claim?" So many things are said inside of video games, outside of video games, in politics, whatever, where people are just like, "Well, that's because of this." It's like, really? Can you demonstrate that with a primary source? Like, how do you know? Are you a journalist? Did you do the digging? Do you have a mole inside the corporation? So, like, I think it's fair, like, to criticize missteps, and it's also fair to be disappointed when they mess something up that you cared about. Like, game players are passionate. I am a passionate game player myself. No one's out here working every day trying to have one over on you, other than we're trying to sell you a game. We're trying to make a game we hope you will like. It's an imperfect process. The results are mixed all of the time. Uh, so yeah, I think it's really also be charitable. Like a lot of people work really hard to try to do this, and we are our own worst critics. We know why things didn't work out, um, and we're pretty harsh on ourselves, and it's really hard. The one thing I have absolutely zero tolerance for, though, is the lazy developer meme. Like, if you could do it better, if you're not lazy, then by all means, go make your game. There's nothing stopping you. You can go download Unity tomorrow, and you can make your GTA clone that is better than the lazy 1,000-person team. Um, by all means, you do that. You go and get the VC money. Just say it's Web3 and has NFTs. I'll shower you with money. Like, good luck. Like, people literally die making games. Literally die. I've seen it happen. People burn themselves out. They injure themselves. Marriages are ruined. That's the thing that drives me the most up the wall is the lazy developer meme. And actually, I think it's meant to. I think it's not because they understand us as being lazy. They're just being jerks.
Yeah, they're just trolling. I mean, uh, probably most of the people that put those memes out aren't developers themselves. Have no desire to be developers, so they don't understand the work that goes into even something simple.
You would be surprised the amount of time someone spends on making flowers look good in a AAA game. It's absurd. The
It
amount of
is.
time we spent on the cape in Anthem for the one character that had a cape. It it was dramatic. Like, oh, the cape got to work this way underwater, and it's got to work this way while you're flying. What if you teleport? And oh, now you're in a cinematic. What does the cape do? It's surprising, and it's also like when you work really closely on something and try to make perfect it, and then you see a game that kind of phones it in, and it's like nails on chalkboard when you see it. And yeah, I'm not then going, those people are lazy. And I'm like, we probably should have done what they did and ignored that problem.
So, like I was saying, EA gets, a lot of hate. As somebody that works for EA, have you ever experienced negativity from friends, family, people that know that you work for EA and they're all passionate about games themselves, especially, if there's some particular title that you worked on that didn't do so well or you got cancelled, for example?
No, actually, my interactions with people out in the world have all been positive. Even with Anthem, which really struggled after launch with a lot of post-launch problems. I was at lunch in Austin, and a gentleman came up to me and was just like, "I don't know how you did it. This is my favorite game ever." And like, it was really well timed because I needed to hear that at that time. It was when you struggle, when a game struggles and you worked on it really hard, like it's hard, and you're just trying to make it successful. Getting that kind of feedback timely like that was really rewarding. I get all sorts of positive interactions. I was going through customs from Canada to the U.S. On a business trip, returning to the U.S., and someone was asking me, "When are they going to do NCAA football again?" And I'm like, we'd really like to. There's just the legal dispute is what's preventing that from happening. Um, so,
How did
like,
that person know that you worked at EA?
well, I said like, oh, I'm returning from a business trip, and he's like, oh, what
Oh,
do you do? Like, I don't get this going into Canada. They're much more businesslike, but coming back into the US, they're more like, welcome home. What's up?
yeah.
Uh, and he was like, oh, really? What do you do? I'm like, "Oh, I'm a video game developer." He's like, where do you work? In Electronic Arts. He's like, really? NCAA is amazing. When are you guys going to make that game again? And I was like, I wish I could tell you, but the legal troubles is what's preventing it.
Okay, so between 2007 and 2009, you was an instructor and you was teaching introduction to video game programming. How what got you into doing that, and how did that influence your video game career post?
So a friend of mine was working there at the Austin Community College, teaching that course. And he was like looking to wrap up that engagement. And I was like, oh, I'd like to try that. So um, that's how I got introduced to it. They had a kind of a very new game development program at the Austin Community College at the time. So I had to apply to be what they called an adjunct professor. But given that it was, it's kind of a, at the time it was, I believe, a non-credited, it's just a skills program. Uh, they weren't as strict with hiring. It was really like, oh, you've been a game developer for this long, you know what you're talking about. Sure, you can do it. Um, so I recast his source materials because he wrote a game in Java. The game was built around, and I used C Sharp and Microsoft's XNA, which still existed at the time. It was very new, but I was attracted to XNA because you could use C Sharp, which I thought was a decent learning environment, and you could also run your games on a console. You could run it on the Xbox 360. So uh, yeah, I taught that course, I think 7 times. Um, and boy, I learned a lot about how hard it is to teach. So I have a tremendous respect for people that are professional teachers. It really educated me on like what it is like to know thing versus something to explain it. Like so much of like when I talk to someone at work and they ask me a question and I'm trying to help them do something, they have so much shared knowledge already. But when you have a student who has like no programming experience at all, and you're trying to help them make their first game in a language like C sharp, uh, I really got um, uh, kind of taken aback, and I almost even quit. Like I was like, oh, maybe I will just not do this another semester. But I decided to stick with it. I said, okay, well, I need to update my course materials. For the first 3 semesters, I spent a lot of time updating my course materials to kind of accommodate like a wide range of potential students because I had students who were professional programmers. I had students who were already pursuing CS degrees, but at an institution that didn't have a game development course. And I had students that were more interested in game design, but at the time, the program required everyone to take the intro to each discipline. So everyone had to take intro to art, intro to design, and intro to programming. There was no production track at that time. So it really, I think it made me better at explaining technical things to a broad audience. And I still use that today. Um, yeah, I learned a lot doing it. It's really hard work, especially when you already have a full time job. Creating the course materials on that first semester was a huge lift. I totally got myself into the deep end. I had no idea how hard it was going to be.
Have you ever thought about, doing some more teaching, especially with
Now,
all the knowledge you've got now?
uh, not not in addition to my day job.
Okay, is it something that you could see yourself, let's say, when you retire, doing some part-time teaching? Because obviously by then you'll have even more knowledge, having worked on these, at these big studios, on these big titles, Frostbite, all that sort of stuff. Do you ever see yourself doing it after you've retired, or maybe semi-retired?
Um, I would rather do mentoring or consult with independent studios that are largely inexperienced. I think I could have a lot to offer an indie studio that is pursuing their first game or their second game, and they kind of have a notion of what went wrong on their first game, but they're not sure how to course correct for the next game. I think I could have a pretty big impact there. I don't think I want to teach in like kind of a classroom with 20 students ever again. That could change, but I don't see myself wanting to do that. Um, there's also like when I'm done doing game development, I don't know what the technology landscape is going to be like then. So I'm not sure uh, I'll have something to teach. If that makes sense.
Okay, and that sort of more advisory style of role that you was talking about. I mean, have you ever thought about, if not now, later on, going and working for a startup, as an advisor, consultant, non-executive director of sorts. Maybe there's a video game startup that's struggling a bit, and you feel like you might be able to just steer them in the right direction after seeing all of the things that have gone on in the industry.
Maybe, as long as I got to work normal hours. Startups to me smack of like unrestricted amounts of overtime. So if I could just Mary Poppins in there and just be like, boop, we'll make this better and make this better and make this better, and then Mary Poppins out, then then I would do it.
Okay, and you mentioned some of the titles that you've worked on. I think you said you've worked on 16 titles in total. Like, what other ones have you worked on? You said Old Republic. You said Anthem. What other ones have you worked on? And in what
Uh,
capacity?
oh well, all titles. I've worked in a technical aspect. So, like the first title I worked on was the Nintendo 64 port of Tony Hawk Pro Skater. That was a really lucky gig to get because it was a great game and it was very successful. I got royalties for it. It was a great learning experience. You learn a lot about programming by porting games between platforms that have some pretty major differences. And back then, the consoles were quite different. So that was a PlayStation 1 to N64 port. I worked on a bunch of N64 titles, 5 in total, including Spider Man, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. But I was more of I didn't work full time on Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3. And then I worked on several PS2 titles. The one I'm most proud of is Pitfall: The Lost Expedition, which was PS2, Xbox, and GameCube. Um, and that was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. Worked more overtime than I should have, and but I still like that game. I think we made a good game. Didn't really find commercial success, but in terms of positive interactions, one of our game designers ran into someone from Naughty Dog, and like they were actually showering praise on that game. So it's like, oh, if someone from Naughty Dog liked it, that's pretty good. I'll take that. Um, the studio also worked on a port of the original Sims to the PlayStation 2 and Xbox and GameCube. That was a massive lift in terms of a technology port. Consoles at that time were extremely memory limited. PlayStation 2 had 32 megabytes of main RAM. At the start screen, The Sims consumed 256 megabytes of RAM. So that was before you even got into the game. So it was and we had to turn it into a 3D game. So that was an interesting experience. Uh, I only worked on that game for a few months, but it was very successful. It was definitely the right call to port that game to the PlayStation 2 because there was an audience there. Like we were skeptical, like, will people who own consoles even want to play The Sims? We didn't know. Um, but yeah, learned a lot from that. Those are some of the standouts. I worked on Battlefield 4 when I worked at Frostbite for a period of time. All Frostbite development was stopped to ship Battlefield 4. That's certainly the most successful EA game I've worked on. Even though it kind of had a rocky launch, it still sold really well. People still play it today. So I'm pretty proud of that one. The Old Republic is the one and only MMO and Star Wars game I've worked on. Uh, I do feel like every game developer will have to make a Star Wars game at some point. Um, it does seem to be like a contract with the gods. It was a massive game at launch, like probably in terms of like the geographic area of all the levels combined. It's just this truly massive experience. Um, I got to really index into a lot of the skills I had for an optimization to work on that game. That's what I primarily worked on. I did work on a few gameplay features, optimizations was my focus, and getting authoritative collision detection working on the servers. But I learned a lot, even though I'm not an audience. I'm not in the MMO audience. I really liked the old Knights of the Old Republic, so I was like, okay, that's enough to make me care enough about this game, and I get to learn about MMOs. So um, proud of that one. I know it wasn't a WoW killer. Turns out there were no WoW killers, except unless you count Fortnite. I don't know, um, but it found its own success, and it did some neat stuff. So I think that's a cool one. I don't want to talk about all 16, but those are some of the highlights.
Okay. I mean, yeah, the Old Republic. It's one of those games every probably 2 3 years I'll go back and have a little play with. It's something I do enjoy playing. There's just so many other games I have. My backlog now that I'm older, an adult. Have a business, family. Other commitments. There's just not as much time. To get through the games as they used to be when I was a kid. So yeah, Old Republic is definitely one of those ones I want to get back to, and I do like that it is free now because I had it when you had to buy it. I remember buying the special edition, which you got the Darth Malgus statue as well, that really nice huge statue, and
Yep, he's sitting on the shelf behind me.
I did. I mean, that was a good special edition. I'm trying to think. Do you remember how much that cost back then?
In the US, it was like 120 bucks. I think it
Yeah, I
was.
mean, here it probably would have been about 80 quid because obviously now $120 will be about 120 quid in reality, but back then it was probably about 80 quid. And that was a good special edition for the money. But you see nowadays what you get for special editions, and it's just so. Yeah, I mean, here's another question for you. What do you think of special editions nowadays where there's just so many of them and it's just digital content. Like you'll get a game for let's say $80, and then 120, $130 you'll get some special edition. But for the most part, it's just some digital unlocks, and there's nothing physical anymore. Not all the games, but a lot of games.
Um, I kind of am on both sides. Like I'm in game development because of Ultima, and those used to come with a cloth map and some other kind of physical item in the
Mm-hmm.
box. Uh, we're well past the cloth map days, and that was standard editions. You got that, and
Yes.
the manual with the beautiful hand drawn art and all that stuff.
Do you
That
remember
used
the
to,
big maps that you used to get with GTA? You would unfold it out.
yeah, it was almost by necessity that those things
Mm-hmm.
were in the box. So in general, I think we should probably be making fewer disposable plastic things in factories to put in game boxes and special editions. Um, I think if a special edition is going to have something nice that's physical, it should be something that will last. Like the special edition for Mass Effect Andromeda has a, a metal nomad in it. Like this is a durable model that could last. Well, mine will probably outlast me. Um, so that's one thing. But if it's just a bunch of tchotchkes, then I'm like, no, I'd prefer the digital content, especially if the digital content is really relevant to my experience of the game. Um, but it's less compelling where the legendary edition is just digital content that other people could just spend as a microtransaction on.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not unique. Then I think the value proposition is less compelling, and I think everyone should just pick like what is the value proposition. If you get the game earlier or some other thing, uh, yeah, I think that's it's a mixed bag, and I think sometimes like games, it's like their special editions might reflect the lack of planning. Because if you're going to make something physical, you have to get on that like planning like a year or more in advance.
Okay, that's a fair bit of time to be fair. Because I do, miss the days where there were a lot of games that it was almost like every major game would get, obviously the regular edition, then there'll be like a steelbox edition, which wasn't too much more usually. Like if the game was 40 quid, the steelbox might be like 45 in most, retailers or Amazon or, some of the cheaper places. But now, if the steel regular is I don't know 60, then the steel box is probably easily 80. and I feel like it's not as good quality as it used to be. But then you would back in the day get like that more limited, edition. I remember the Call of Duty limited editions where you had the RC car for one of them, and I think you had like the fake C. I think it was with the RC car, like the fake C4 as well. And I think you had night vision goggles with another one. But those were definitely some nice, premium, special editions. What I found funny was I would get like if I got the special edition and like let's say for 200 quid, you would look a few months later there'll be a bargain bottom prices for like $60 or 60 quid because the ones they didn't if they didn't sell them more they had to get rid, and so sometimes people got some real good bargains if they waited a few months.
Yeah, well, that's like true of games in general. Like
Yeah.
if you can't stomach the $80 launch price, just wait a few months. Especially if you have a queue of games you're working on.
I
Like you
mean,
don't need to rush out and play it immediately.
yeah, that is one benefit of getting older and having less time for games, is that you actually end up saving. Obviously, you save money 'cause you're not buying as many games, but ignoring that aspect, they get cheaper. Like you said, like bar Call of Duty and some other ones which maintain a high price point for a good amount of their life. Cycle. Most games come down a fair bit within a few months. A year plus, they're hitting rock bottom prices. And what's great is when you've got services like Xbox Game Pass, you got EA's own service, Ubisoft, PlayStation. Sometimes if you don't get round to a game, maybe it's not your top priority. It ends up coming on some of these services, and you're like, "Ooh, that's a nice little surprise. I'll get it for free, but I wanted it." Anyway. Plus, you get the other benefit of if it's broken at launch, which there's so many games that are, there's a better chance that you'll be more playable by the time you actually get round to playing it, which is also another big advantage.
Yeah, no, wait for all the patches.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I mean, what's your opinion on mobile gaming and these sort of like pay to win games with so many in-app purchases? I know it gets a lot of hate and a lot of negativity. This isn't directly just about EA, but just the industry as a whole. Where it's gone over the last decade or so.
Uh, well, I would say that the mobile landscape for developers is really harsh. Like it's brutally competitive. There is this traditional gamers, I believe, are the ones complaining about the mobile model, which is either pay to win or just frankly pay to play very much at all.
Hmm.
Um, but the economics of selling games at $2 to $3 is terrible for compared to the development investment.
I mean, it
So
was great when the App Store first came out because they were pretty much all paid unless you had a light version. And because there weren't many games out there, if it was half decent, you could start making a bit of money. But that didn't last for long.
yeah, no, I definitely all the first movers who got games out quickly and
Yeah.
like very simple games making several $100,000 for the people who threw them on there early. Like great. Like I hope they bought a house and that they have a lasting effect on their life. But doing that now is nearly impossible.
Oh, yeah. It's
And
it's
everything is
dominated by the same big players. You look at the top charts, you've got some of the more classic studios like EA, but then you've got I mean, they're not classic studios like EA, but they're basically the big studios within the mobile space now that came around, let's say 10 years ago, stuck it out, but they're just the ones that keep releasing games, and it's really hard for you to get into that top 10, top 100, you know, list.
yeah, um it's brutal. Like I don't play a lot of mobile games. The ones I play are more like um, uh, they resemble more traditional games, like Monument Valley and Sword and Sorcery were some of my favorites. Um, it I don't enjoy the interface, the touchscreen interface for playing a lot of games, like, especially if they're trying to like turn a 3D game into like a controller where you kind of have a virtual controller on the screen. I think that's very crude, especially if there's like this is just a sized down version of a game that you can play elsewhere with proper controls. I'd never play a game like that. But I understand like people are kind of chasing a business model that works. Again, this isn't a charity; they're trying to make money, and like I think they're some of them are like anti-consumer, some are um, I guess I should pivot. Consumers bear some responsibility here. People are making the games that they can make because this is what will sustain them and like make it worth investing in games. And consumers are putting they're voting with their dollars. So if you see vocal people on a forum on Reddit decrying like Clash of Clans or whatever for whatever these pay to win mechanics are, the overwhelming majority of people are not commenting on it and are spending money and they keep doing it because those people exist. If unless that changes, the model on mobile will not change. It'll be either subscription based or freemium.
Oh yeah, I mean that model freemium. I think there's definitely some merit to it because you get some titles on there that become free, are free. They don't go crazy on the in-app purchases or the ads, and you get to discover games that you may not have discovered otherwise. But also vice versa, if you play a game, it's not the best. You don't feel the urge to keep playing it. Whereas if you've bought it for 60, $80, sometimes I know I've done it myself when I've bought a game, especially when when I was a bit younger, where that 60, $80 or 40, 60 quid meant a lot more. I would complete games that I probably wouldn't want to if they were just given to me for free. So there's definitely some merit in the model. It's just there's obviously a lot of games where they've taken it to the extreme. But I do like your point of it's working because people are buying the in-app purchases, are constantly playing these games.
Yeah, I do think we have an obligation as developers to make it clear when people are spending money and the amount that they're spending. There have been a number of cases, which really, in some cases, are just certain types of fraud where uh, minors, for example, can spend money that as they're spending their parents' money effectively and
Mm-hmm.
rack up these huge bills of like $300. I don't know the details of what happened, but Fortnite got fined a very large amount of money in the United States for some purchasing mechanics, something close to $300 million. I mean, it was a steep fine. Um, so I think we do have an obligation to be like, it's clear that like you're you're converting real currency to a virtual currency. This is a one-way trip. You can't get this money back. Parents need to have control over that for kids that are minors. Like we do have to be responsible merchants in that sense. Like we have so much less exposure than like a retailer does to like returns and like uh, in enraged
Complaints as well,
customers.
that
Yeah,
sort of stuff. Yeah.
yeah. So like I think we have to be responsible, be upfront as possible about it. I think also the platform holders like Apple and Android need to be responsible as well. And I think they should include clawback mechanisms for like because it's hard to police for them because there's so many apps in the app stores
Mm-hmm.
that they if something fraudulent gets through that they have a mechanism contractually and technologically to claw back funds from a developer who's basically run a scam.
Yeah, I mean, I find the big problems lay, these sort of things where a kid spent $300 on their parents' credit card, for example, is usually with the select few big titles. So they don't even really need a system to police or analyze the smaller titles so much, just because they're one not don't have the same sort of reach and probably not as addictive, to be fair either. So it really is the Fortnites of the world, the Clash of Clans, the Candy Crushes, and they know those titles. Like if they just did it on the top 100, top grossing freemium titles, that would, go a long way. But then there is an incentive for, let's say, Apple to look away and, act dumb, as you were, because they get a cut of the, money. Obviously, ignoring Fortnite, we've had, they've had those issues, but in generally speaking, obviously they're getting a cut of the revenue, and unless they're really forced to, they would obviously rather have that money.
Well, certainly, but they also don't like to be sued.
No.
Companies like that the least, and they don't like to be in the crosshair of governments.
Yeah, I feel like it's the crosshair more than the suing thing, because you see some of these big companies that get sued. It sounds like a lot of money for the average person, but when you look at how much money they make between one, lawsuit that's successful and the next lawsuit, you're like, it's really just them paying a fine. It's
Yeah.
not that much, but then it is the crosshair, publicly speaking, and then governmentally, because it can really, one, hurt the brand, and two, like if the government really decides to, go after them to make an example, for example, they could really make it difficult, for a particular company. So yeah, they definitely want to stay out of the crosshairs. So there's that incentive to do enough that the government and, public opinion will ignore them.
Yeah, I agree. I do think on the technological side, if they solve it for everyone, if they have a mechanism to take 30% of purchases, then they have a mechanism to claw that back. It's just a matter of intentionality and wherewithal. Uh, but yeah, like long story short, though, mobile is a difficult environment to be successful in. Um, the, the Wild West days are gone. It's really hard without an IP or uh, marketing that is beyond the cost of development to even get noticed.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like, we're discussing, this sort of stuff with in-app purchases, the freemium model. One sort of idea I've just thought of is have some sort of verification process to, I mean, obviously you need like a debit card, but some sort of verification process to prove that you're, an adult, for example. And if, let's say, you are giving your, I think there is something like this, but like if you're giving your device or a device to a child, mark it as there's a child device, and you on your phone, for example, will get, it'll pop up like the in-app purchase cannot take place without you notify, you doing some sort of verification on your phone, whether that's your fingerprint, Face ID, some sort of two-factor authentication. So like if your kid has a tablet, like it's just not feasible for the, I mean, physically, they're not physically capable of making that purchase if that device is marked as a child device. Like you need to authenticate that until they're an adult.
Those mechanisms do exist, like at least on iOS. Like our kids, if they want to make a purchase, we have to approve it on our own devices. But those are mechanisms that haven't always existed, and I'm
No,
sure
yeah.
uh, there's an incentive to try to get around those for developers who are less ethical.
Yeah.
So it's kind of keeping up. It's a bit of a rat race there, but it's also as a parent you need to have kind of a very engaged relationship with your kid's relationship to technology. Like that's kind of part of it. It can't just be like, oh, Bobby's on his phone. Good luck. Like, there's so many examples and so many ways like kids can get into trouble with technology that like you just need to have a in the same way that like driving a car has its risks when kids first start driving. Like they need to it needs to be a managed relationship between the parent and the device and the software. And unfortunately, many people are Luddites, and that's not a criticism. It's just like they're not technological. At least I know most of the this revenue generating strategies that my kids will encounter if they play mobile games. As a game developer, I know those, and I'm fairly informed. But as an average parent, you might be completely ignorant. Like I just use my phone for taking down grocery lists and looking at the web sometime and news. And otherwise, I am a not technological person. Those are people get caught by surprise at the kind of the stuff that is available and what children can get into.
Oh
And
yeah,
this goes way outside of games too, into social media and all of that stuff.
yeah. I think as a society, parents in general do have a responsibility of educating themselves. I know parents do have a tendency to put the blame on others. Like, I don't know about technology, it's Apple's fault or it's school's fault or, it's the games, it's the game developers' fault. But the reality is, it's either you fully ban your kids, then there's obviously that's a separate discussion. But if you're not banning your kids from interacting in these medium, games, social media, phones, for example, you really should read up on it, keep up to date. Obviously you don't need to know the ins and outs of how to use TikTok effectively to promote a brand, but understand that it exists, what it is, and the sort of content that's on there. And I don't think that takes too much time if you actively do it, but I feel like people can get lazy and they just don't want the effort.
Uh, well, as a parent of twins, I don't think anything's done out of laziness. It's more of desperation and available time. Like you have to make time for these things, and our society, especially in America, where we don't make time for parents, you're just part of the capitalist hustle. Like it's very difficult. There's all these demands. Like people are looking for anything to be easy, and there are other people who are looking to exploit the attention of children. So I think we have a collective responsibility to treat kids and parents fairly, even if there's money to be made. Uh, and it's I'm sure there's lots of ways to fail as a parent. There's numerous ways, and like digital babysitting is definitely a thing people rely on because true babysitting is expensive. So if they're paying one way or they're paying the other, who's getting the money, Fortnite or the babysitter? Um, these are there's I don't think there's a lot of easy answers. So I don't want to be prescriptive. Like what I said about parenting and parents before I became a parent, I apologize for all of that. I was I was not informed. I do try. We try to make good choices. We try to navigate difficulties as they come up. Um, and yeah, I think that the governments need to make an environment that um, permits parents to have time to focus on these things. Like childcare should be less expensive. All those things out there, they all there's an interaction between all of this stuff. Um, and parental available parent time is definitely something that can be easily exploited by um, any number of uh, business practices, whether intentional or not. I think trying to monetize children is itself ethically fraught because they don't have their own money. And even if they did, they're not equipped to make informed decisions to the same degree that adults are. And some would argue maybe adults aren't, in many cases, equipped to make informed decisions, especially when
No.
it relates to technology. So, uh, um, yeah, it's fraught. It's a difficult subject. Like, um, I just think that we should have the tools, and there should be rules of the road, and everybody should agree to play by the same rules. Um, and like, I'm so not so much motivated by making money that I'm like, I need to take money from 7 year olds or their parents
Mm.
uh, in a nefarious way, where it's not explicitly like you are making a purchase for this thing. The value proposition of this thing we think is X. You please determine if that's a valuable thing to do.
So, in terms of like, we've discussed the games that you've worked on. Like, what game would wish you could have worked on? Like, I'm sure there's some game either within EA or outside of EA that even if it was maybe even before your gaming career, that you think, I would have loved to work on that, and in what capacity?
Well, as it comes to EA games, I think even today it would be cool to work on Apex.
Have you tried moving over? Because obviously it's an active game.
Um, no comment. Uh,
Okay.
I think it's a cool game. I think that their success story is compelling because they just shadow dropped this game a week later. It was available, and they had a huge success with it. I think that they have a really interesting approach to the way they do design, and so I think that's pretty cool. What I would like to work on isn't more of a specific game, but more of a genre. But unfortunately, this genre is almost entirely done in the indie world now. So um, meaning the pay isn't very good. So the adventure games, I love adventure games. I grew up playing adventure games. There's very few, if any, AAA adventure games. I think what I would classify as an adventure game, the last one that's a AAA game, was probably The Last Guardian. Um,
That was a good game.
it's a beautiful game. But yeah, like there's so many adventure games I played coming up that had a huge influence. I've worked on a lot of other genres, and I feel lucky to have worked on as many genres and games that I have. A lot of people could work on a game 5 years to have it canceled. That would be brutal. Like, and that's like their whole career up to that point.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I think working on an adventure game would be cool. Um, but it's not a genre that it really attracts a lot of. It's hard to justify a AAA investment profile for an adventure game um, that isn't have some other type of hook in it, whether that's something to do with microtransactions after launch or a live service, or like I just want a pure old school single player adventure game. That would be fun to work on.
Yeah, I mean, not working on it, per se. I know we do get a fair few single player games these days, but like compared to what it used to be, I do miss the days where there were so many single player titles. You'll get those titles that were probably a solid 7 or 8 out of 10. They were never like a 10 out of 10, but they were just, you never expected it to come out. It wasn't from a pre-existing franchise. It was a bit different, and you just thought, oh, this is a nice game. This is fun. It's a little different, and I do miss those days. I feel like there's a lot of push for multiplayer gaming. Studios make a lot of money, from that, and obviously, gamers are, you know really wanting multiplayer titles. So when you do get a single player game and it's good, like an Uncharted, for example, or a God of War, I really do, get excited. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Oh, those are the games I want to play. I don't have enough time for multiplayer games. Like to have an enjoyable experience, especially if there's a PvP element. So I need to play games I can pick up and set down, and I like those type of games. The thing is, and as we've learned with the recent like Sony leak, now you have a dollar amount to associate with something like Horizon, $200 million. That's a lot of units that needs to sell to break even, and even more to be profitable. Sony has the benefit of using their premium single player titles as kind of a way to sell the platform because they make money on every game that comes out on the PlayStation. It's harder for a independent publisher that doesn't have those hardware stakes involved to realize that return. Um, and again, it's people voting with their dollars. Like people vote for multiplayer repeatedly over and over again, and I see the same forums where people are like, why don't you make single player games or more single player games? I'm like, why don't you buy them? This is my response, is like,
Uh,
we, here's what, and I'm just trying to say this clearly, like to justify the expense of $200 million, we're talking about 15 million to 20 million units sell at the kind of higher price point. of $60 US, $70 US now. We're kind of in the Gen 5 pricing categories, or Gen 11. I don't know. I'm not trying to irritate Nintendo fans. Um, uh, Unless, like, I guess one of the only companies that kind of can enjoy that level of success and more is Nintendo. They make AAA money without AAA price points on development.
Hmm.
And I have nothing but respect for how idiosyncratic and great Nintendo is at what they do. Um, but like, yeah, just looking at the top five Switch games in the top five, the last time I looked, Animal Crossing, 45 million units. It's a AAA casual game, although
Yeah,
it's actually kind of hardcore. If you've ever played Animal Crossing, it's quite demanding. Um, it
but it's definitely something that if it was on mobile, let's say on an iPad, it would fit right in. Maybe slightly, cut down, but you wouldn't feel out of place the way when they port GTA or like the Knights of the Old Republic. Even though they say, even though they sell well for like a fixed amount, they still feel out of place, compared to a Candy Crush on mobile.
Yeah, and I think you should play to a platform's strengths. But that's an example of, outside of the idiosyncrasies of Nintendo's success, to be able, like, they're the most successful single player game maker in the world by far. Like, there's no comparison. We don't even know if God of War Ragnarok is profitable in a strictly on its own dollars and cents way. I suspect that it probably is, but not in a way that would make EA go, well, we should make a God of War. Because
Yeah.
we're talking about, like, if it costs $200 million to make, that game needs to make over $1 billion to justify the investment.
Mm.
That's the kind of go big or
Returns
go
that you're
home
looking for.
attitude big publishers have about that kind of investment. It's like, it needs to really crush it. And there are examples of, like, making AAA games that seem to have, like, this groundswell of support in the general public that don't sell well. EA example, Mirror's Edge Catalyst. There was a vocal, turns out small, group of people on the internet that wanted another Mirror's Edge game. I love Mirror's Edge. I love the first one. I loved Catalyst. Um,
But do you
I
think that was like Mirror's Edge Catalyst came out a fair few years after the first one? Do you think there was the time, gap as well? How many years, between the two games? I remember I played one, I played two. I enjoyed the second one, but I just felt like number one was so out there, and then so many other games, you know, came and went. So many other genres, and it was like, okay, if this was 2 years after the first one, maybe.
um, yeah, I don't know. It would it would it have built an audience, or would it just the same number of people bought it? Because I don't think the same number of people buying it would have been sufficient. Like, it would have to grow. Like take Assassin's Creed as an example of something that is largely single player and built its audience. Like, a first release wasn't a critical darling, sold decently, but they didn't, like, balk and didn't say, like, okay, well, that was weird. We're not going to do that again. They're just like, nope, we're going to make another Assassin's Creed game. Making new IPs is hard. We'll consider that a sunk cost. And to their credit, they did that. And Assassin's Creed is a hugely successful franchise now.
Yeah.
Um, but is I don't know what its success in dollars and cents compared to, like, a Call of Duty, though. Like, this monster that sells 30 million units a year. Um,
Yeah, that makes like hundreds. I mean, like, I, I think they sometimes they close $1 billion of sales like in a weekend or in a week or something like that. Like, it is pretty ridiculous. The numbers they deal with. When they launch.
yeah, and but at the cost of not making some, like, cool single player games, right? But, like, they're making money, like, and people are buying them. So, like, Call of Duty will continue to come out every year until people drift to some other um, titles, like, until they stop being successful. So, like, it's um, it's partially comes out of my own personal frustration with wishing uh, games the games audience spent their, I guess, spread the money around more. Um, I don't know if that's very eloquent, but it seems like we're gonna get you get these top 10 kind of monster titles that'll get like either as a live service last forever or be continually invested in, like Call of Duty, um, because that's where most of the money that's being spent gravitates towards. And it just like I'm glad the indie titles exist. I don't know how, because they're a shot in the arm for just new ideas, and uh, I imagine it's very hard to make your money back and get noticed in indie development. So I have nothing but respect and praise for people who are putting themselves out there trying to do something that is underrepresented or different.
Oh yeah, for sure. So you're a technical guy. You've been a programmer. You head up teams now. Do you do any personal programming projects? And beyond the technical side, what are your hobbies and interests?
No, I don't do any personal programming, and haven't done so mostly since I became a parent. uh, uh, Also, like I feel like I even when I was actively programming, I benefited from away from keyboard time um, more, uh, and I felt largely felt like I was engaged with what I was doing in my day to day. So I didn't feel like I'm not getting to scratch this itch technically. Although I would do stuff to learn things, like whenever someone drops a new language, I want to go play around with it. Uh, but most of my hobbies are non-technical. I mean, I still like to play video games, but uh, I don't spend a lot of time doing that. Um, I really try to do active things. Like now that I live in the Pacific Northwest, I've taken up snowboarding again, so I look forward to doing that in the winter. Although here in Oregon, you can snowboard at Mount Hood year round. Um, and just recently bought an e-bike, so I'm kind of putting some miles on that. Um, and yeah, I really like to try to stay active and slow down the process of aging safely, because you blow out your knee, then that'll make you inactive for at least a year and a half. So be careful, kids. It's easy to bench yourself.
Oh yeah, for sure. So, what advice would you give to somebody that's looking to build a career in the games industry, especially, like you have in a technical role in a big company like EA? Because I know a lot of people do have, aspirations of, these studios that they played games from, when they grew up, or, they're playing games now and they want to, work for those studios. What advice would you give? And then on top of that, what advice would you give of balance between work and your personal side, especially now that you have kids?
Um, so if you're just entering the game industry, I would try to get a job on a game you know is going to ship, because if you're working like a more independent fashion or on a more pie in the sky project that doesn't seem to have an end in sight, you are in cancel country at that point. And you could spend years, you could still learn stuff, but having stuff to show for on your resume is to build your next, you should be thinking about your next role. That's why when you're early on, I think you should try to get on titles that will ship. Because it's a big deal to ship a game. A lot of them don't. And it you can point to projects you've worked on when you're out there looking for your next gig. Um, in terms of loyalty to a company, um, frankly, companies will try to blow up a lot of smoke up your ass, but loyalty goes both ways, and it rarely goes in your direction as much as they expect it in their direction. So um, always be open to an opportunity you can't refuse. Definitely keep your resume up to date. Stay interested. Doesn't mean you have to talk to every recruiter that pokes you on LinkedIn. They're out there. um, uh, But I think you should also think about like, what do you really want to do? Why are you here? What do you want to achieve? Um, is it realistic? Like, is someone going to hand you the keys of? Are you going to be creative director of the next GTA in 2 years? No, absolutely not. That's not going to happen. Um, in terms of work-life balance, I think you should just defend it. You try to find a gig that supports it, and that's hard on the independent scene because those companies live and die by their projects. So it's easier to find inside of established studios or established franchises, I think, because they work. They're more like clockwork. They're not going to get derailed and ask people to like put their shoulder against the wheel for 24 hours a day to make a game. But you don't get that time back. So don't work your weekends to make someone else rich. Full stop. Even if you think you enjoy it, you'll be a better game developer by time spent away from making games.
Yeah, I think that's definitely good advice. That's something I've learned now that I'm 31 years old. Again, not super old, but a lot, older and wiser than I was just 5, 10 years ago. And that's definitely something I've learned. Sometimes taking that break to, it's like that analogy. Sometimes you have to stop chopping the trees down to rest, sharpen your axe, and then get back to it. Sometimes that's taking a holiday. It might be taking, going on a walk, half an hour lunchtime. And especially when you're remote, which there's so many opportunities to be remote now, you can, do things that if you're in the office, even if you're, not in a meeting, randomly at 2 p.m., I doubt your boss would like you getting up and going for a half an hour walk. Even if you stayed an extra half an hour, it probably wouldn't be liked if you've taken your lunch break. Whereas at home, if you got no meetings, nobody's really going to contact you, but you got your phone anyway in case, you can do that. Or you can take that break. Maybe even spend it with family, or if you have friends nearby and they're in a similar situation, meet up with them. That's definitely something to value. And the other thing I would say is, and this is still something I struggle with, try and be in the moment and enjoy that time off you're taking. Because if you're taking time off, but you're basically just constantly thinking about work, and you're on your phone looking at something about work, whether it's emails or researching or something, or you're just thinking, oh, when can I go back to my laptop just to look at a couple of things. You're not really taking that break that
No,
gives you
you're not.
that energy back. It just doesn't work. It's like putting your phone on charge for 1 minute, then disconnecting it, and then having a go on it, and then putting it back. And like, you're not going to get very far with the battery like that. Like, you need to like leave it charge up. And that's the same with you, because I've got holiday coming up next week, and I'm going to be away for 10 days, and I'm saying to myself, enjoy it. Like, I'm spending the money, so like the money's getting spent, regardless. Try and enjoy it. I'm gonna have a private pool. Just be in that moment, and don't try and feel like, oh, I have to achieve something in that day or in those 10 days, especially in terms of work.
Yeah, and you don't want to contribute to an expectation of availability when people are supposed to be using their time. Your time off is a part of your compensation.
Yeah.
Use it, spend it, and delete Slack from your phone. I always delete Slack and Outlook from my phone. I only use Outlook for work email. Because I don't even muscle memory want to open it. Like, I just want to leave it alone and stay disconnected, because you can't get that rest you're talking about by keeping like one foot in the pond. You just gotta keep away, and sometimes you have to stay away longer. Like, when I've been working a lot and I was working a lot of overtime, I had this 3 week period of time off where it took a full 7 days before I felt like I was even starting to get rest. Like, it took that long for my brain to disconnect, even though I wasn't checking email or doing any of that. So it's a luxury. Don't squander it on, FOMO or whatever it is that's keeping you like looking back at your work. There's a few people like VPs and stuff and very big companies that they have this kind of expectation attached to their role where they're available, but it's usually not for rank and file developers. So don't encourage it. Don't be a part of it.
No, definitely, enjoy that time off, and be in the moment because you're not going to get that time back, especially when you get a bit older, you have kids, you have a family, because, it is that typical thing. But now that I am a father, my daughter's almost 16 months old, I do look back and think, where did those 16 months go? And it's just like 16 months have gone like that. And I wanted to go to university, age 18. I just look at the 16 months that I've gone, and I think it won't be long till she's 3, 4. That's school time. It won't be long till she's like 11, 12. That's high school time. And then after that, it's university time, and then she's gone. She's away for a few years. So it's very easy to just get busy with work and busy with stuff that, frankly, in 10 years, most of it you're not going to be that fussed about. Obviously, get your work done, do the household chores that you need to get done. Don't let your life, you know, in go into disarray. Get stuff done, but enjoy that time with the people that you want to enjoy it with. Because ultimately, I think that will bring you the most happiness as well.
Oh, I agree too. The job you're working now is likely not the job you'll be working 5 years from now.
Mm.
Um, your family is way more important, um, and those time with kids, like that's precious. You never get that back. So that's an investment. And if anything, what I've appreciated about the pandemic and that kind of the forced transition to work from home was I got to spend a lot more time with my children than I would have otherwise because they were home too, and um, I got to be like front and center for a lot of stuff that I would have missed because they would have gone to their office and I would have gone to mine.
Mm. I mean, how old are your kids? Are they still young or are they pretty old now?
They're 11.
Okay, so they're still kids. They're still children, per se. I mean, are they into gaming like you? Are they into the technical side as well?
Uh, yeah, they're huge into games. They've explored like programming apps online that have like different like, okay, now solve this problem in Python. Now solve this problem in C++. So they've explored it. They've used Scratch and stuff. But like they're not into it hardcore. I mean, they like Minecraft as much as everyone else their age, that kind of thing. But yeah, they have they spend a lot of time on Switch. Well, the amount of time that we permit on Switch.
So so talking about time for gaming, how do you manage and handle that as someone that's in the industry as a gamer yourself, but with the current technology landscape? Like, one, how much are you providing them in terms of time, and how is that balanced? And like, what's your opinions of that?
Well, we have a prescribed amount of game time, and they have a certain amount of time they can spend on it each day, and we have some other expectations of them. We call it a privilege. It's like they don't get to play every day. They don't get to necessarily play for the same amount. Like if we're like, hey, we got these other obligations we're going to do, like that means it's going to cut into what is your regular game time. During school, it's more prescribed because there's just fewer hours in the day. In summer, we're a little bit more open ended, but they have a lot of interests away from games as well. So they just go do the other things as once they set the games down. Um, we recently purchased phones, but like we have this like blanket ban on like social media. Like they will not own a device that I pay for myself or pay for the service then use social media. I absolutely think social media is rot for children.
Oh yeah, for
Um,
sure. Like, TikTok. I mean, all of them to an extent, but the way TikTok is, Instagram is, and obviously Facebook being one of the more original ones, it's just insane. And another one that I don't think people comprehend is YouTube. Like, it's another one that can really just rot your brain if you're just watching just rubbish on there. And just because again, it's the same thing scrolling. Once you watch one, the next one automatically plays, or you just scroll and you look up for recommended stuff. It is just effectively a social media platform, but with video.
Yeah, we don't give them open-ended access to YouTube. We It's purpose driven. It's like you have to have a purpose to use YouTube.
Hmm.
Like if you're looking at a fix your air conditioner, that's when we look at YouTube. Like if they're looking for like I'm at this incredibly hard challenge in Donkey Kong Country, it's like okay, yeah, you can look at how they did that.
Yeah,
So it's like purpose driven. They're not just allowed to scroll and browse and
endlessly. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do. I mean, I think we've always had that in society where we do mindlessly, it wasn't scrolling initially, but we do mindlessly just jump from one to another. It's like, do you remember before the age of Netflix and Hulu, where we would have, we would be on TV, but then we would just sort of, flick through channels and try and find the least boring thing to pass the time by, and I think that was very toxic back then. That's just gone to another level with Netflix, with YouTube, and with social media like TikTok as well.
It's the first infinite scroll was channel surfing.
Yeah, it was. I think the thing is, if you have, like, say, if you have a purpose, and like, there's nothing wrong with watching Netflix. If, let's say, your latest show, the latest season of a show that you really love is out, you want to watch that show, and then you go on, you watch that episode that's out that week, if it's a weekly release, and then you go off it, that's fine. But when you go on it, automatically when you just get home and you're just scrolling for, like, sometimes people can spend 30 to 60 minutes scrolling and not even like actually watching something. The act of scrolling itself can be very terrifying, and then they just watching something they probably don't really want to watch, and I think
Yeah,
that's a real
I,
problem.
I think it's almost like if people have talked about this with Netflix, particularly, that there's too much choice. So
Yeah,
it has to be recommendation driven. And I look for recommendations from not Netflix itself, from other sources. Like I'll read articles like, here's the coolest shows that are about to drop off of Netflix. Will be like, is there
yeah,
something on there that I want to watch?
yeah.
I rarely am successful just scrolling through it, finding something that I will
No,
like.
you never are.
Um, so I like when I learn about something and I know it's going to stick around for a while, I'll stick it in my list. Um, but otherwise, it has to be like someone has to tell me about a cool new show. And I don't subscribe to every single service. Like people are like, "Oh, you got to watch that on Hulu," and I'm like, "I don't have Hulu."
Yeah,
if I
yeah,
if I buy Hulu, I need to drop something else. I want to keep it limited.
yeah. I mean, what are your services, go-to services then, streaming wise, right
I
now?
I've had Netflix the longest for sure. I've had Netflix since they had DVDs.
Okay, so
And
like, really back in the day then, because I kind of remember those days, but I never, used that service, and I think they did video games on that service as well. I think a friend of mine used to do that, but I only used it when they actually did the streaming stuff. I remember using it before House of Cards, came out, and then House of Cards was that big one, that first I think it was the first title that they made themselves, and it was huge.
yeah, it was their HBO moment, House of Cards and
Mm,
Orange is the New Black. So I've had that. We have like Amazon just because we are Prime. You get a video service with Prime, and there's some good stuff on there, and just like sometimes movies you want to watch are on there. Um, and we have Disney Plus. Like that's although I'm eyeing Disney Plus as one I might not keep. Uh,
okay, well, why not? You don't think there's enough value or enough content on there? And
well,
there's a lot of kids content as well.
yeah, but we have no shortage of that on the other services.
Mm,
It's more of like they have like kind of these lost leader shows where they spend a lot of money, like The Mandalorian and Loki, but then they have some other shows where it's like they're not they're just not as good and they're not spending about the amount.
mm,
And I know they can't spend infinite amount of money on shows just to retain and grow their subscribers modestly every month. I know the economics, but it's just like doesn't mean I need to send them that money. So we'll see. It costs less than like two coffees. Like if I go to the coffee shop near my house with my spouse, so it's also like it's really not that much money. So that's why it just sticks around for so long. Although Netflix
Yeah,
is getting up there where every time I see it, I'm like, I don't use it much. Are the kids still using it? If once they go to college, I might not be a Netflix subscriber anymore.
yeah. I mean, Netflix in general, it's had a rough 2 or 3 years. It's one of those things. They were one of the early guys. They did it so well, and they paved, the way for all these other services. And these other services have come along. Like, obviously, Disney had their huge library. They was able to leverage. They released and they had a lot of content. And I think the platform as a technical service wasn't too bad either. That was my hesitation with Disney, but I don't think it was too bad. Amazon's one not the best, but they don't need to concentrate on it. To be honest, they got so many other businesses that they have, whereas Netflix it's literally just that. Like if their streaming service just went down tomorrow, that's their business gone.
Yeah, there's nothing else. Like
No, no,
they don't release in theaters. They don't. I mean, they are nascently in games, but yeah, they don't have all these other business interests.
no, they don't. So I mean, that's all of the main questions that I've got. I've got a few just generic questions, quick fire questions that I ask to my guests at the end. Do you have a few minutes to go through them? Quick fire.
Sure.
Yeah. So would you, if you was to run your own company, would you rather run a 10-person or a 1,000-person company, and why?
Oh, geez. I guess I'd want to either run a 10-person company with a great idea or a 1,000-person company with uh, lots of ideas.
Okay.
So uh, I wouldn't want to start a 10-person company unless I had a really great idea that I felt had a lot of, you know, there was wind in them sails.
Yeah, a lot of
Otherwise,
moving parts that was
uh,
that were required.
yeah. Um, Given where I'm at in my career, I'm more likely to end up in the upper echelons of a 1,000-person company,
Hmm.
and I'm less likely to join a startup. So probably the latter, 1,000-person
Okay.
company.
So, would you rather have 5 million US dollars up front or 500,000 a year for the rest of your life, and why?
Oh, definitely the 500,000 a year, especially if that's after taxes.
Yeah, let's just say after taxes. Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, like that's in that ends up being a lot more money anyway, assuming I live that long. And I already have the rest of my income. So, not that I would say no to either.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's one of those things where if you have to choose, yeah, you have a choice, but otherwise, you're not going to say no.
Yeah, I mean, if I really wanted to retire 5 million right now, that could do that totally.
Yeah,
Like,
I'll get the job done. So, what's your favorite board game, video game, and movie?
oh, geez, I'll have to be circumsp. Like, so my favorite board game is Axis and Allies. Although friendships end with that game, and rules mongering and arguments. That's a great game. I also think Pandemic, which I played long before the actual pandemic, is an excellently designed board game. Um, my favorite Gen 4 video game is The Last Guardian. Probably my favorite game overall is the Shadow of the Colossus. But it's hard to pick. There's so many great games in there, and I can get down into genres too. Um, my favorite EA game is Mirror's Edge Catalyst. Um, and my favorite movie, if I had to pick one, is probably Millennium Actress. It's a Satoshi Kon film. It's an animated film from Japan, and I miss him dearly. He died too young. He was an amazing director. But if you've slept on Millennium Actress, go see that. It's great.
Okay, I'll definitely put that on my list. So, what video game are you looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to finishing Dead Space. um,
I'm guessing the remaster you're talking
yeah,
about.
the remaster. I've been playing that. I've been. The problem is I'm bouncing between two, Ragnarok and Dead Space. So I'm getting far in neither.
Yeah,
Um,
I haven't played Ragnarok yet. I need to play that. I started Dead Space. I was about a couple of hours into it because I really loved the original and number two. And when they announced that remake, I was excited for it. Bought it again. It's just so many other games to just play with. I'm in the middle of Jedi Survivor, Horizon 2, Horizon VR. I'm trying to think, Stray. Like, too many games.
Yeah, my son just finished Stray. He really liked it. I I'm looking forward to playing Ghost of Tsushima, which is in my that's my primary backlog title. If I finish these
Oh,
other two,
so like go and play. Forget every other game. If that's in your backlog, it's so good. Go and play that game. When you play that game, obviously they've had some updates now for PS5, and they got the native, language, support as well with the lip syncing. Like before, it wasn't there. Yeah, it was only for English. But like the graphics on that, even on a PS4 Pro, it beats most games today, and the that is a game that feels like a piece of art. When you look at that and you're riding around on the horse, you just like you can tell they put effort into this.
yeah, that's when I'm. Yeah, so now I have to bounce between three games. But the unreleased, I got to really answer the question. Unreleased game. I'm looking forward to the next Insomniac Spider-Man game because Spider-Man 2019 was a fantastic game.
It
I
was, yeah.
platinumed that game. It's the only game
Same.
at that point that I had platinumed.
Or was that your
So
first? Was that your first plat?
yeah, so yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Like I played through the Miles Morales game with my son, and it's yeah, it's those games are just a blast. I think Spider-Man's the perfect video game superhero because of his
Mm.
mechanics. It's just so fun to swing around and do stuff with Spidey.
Yeah, and he works really well with that sort of over the top, nature that you have in video games compared to movies. It definitely translates well compared to some others. Saying that, Batman with the Arkham games translated very well. They did that very well, but I feel like Spider-Man. I mean, they've had the Spider-Man games over the years for a very long time now, and they've always been pretty decent. Many of them have, but the Insomniac ones have been amazing. Looking forward to number two as well. I mean, Insomniac in general always make good games. They're a solid developer.
Yeah, no, they know what they're doing, and they know where my wallet is when they make a Spider-Man game.
Oh yeah, I mean they're one of those last few studios that really haven't made a shift to multiplayer. You got them, you got Naughty Dog. Trying to think, who else is still out there. What Guerrilla Games that's still doing really great single player experiences that I'm happy to just give them 60, 80, $100, whatever the price is in America nowadays, because you're going to get a good experience with them and the storyline's going to be good.
Yeah, for sure. Like they're one to watch.
Oh yeah. So final question, two-parter: does money buy you happiness, and what does a good life mean to you?
So I'm going to lean on a quote from my father for the money one. He said, "Money won't buy you happiness, but not having it will make you miserable." Especially in America. Like, so I'll stick with that. And I'm sorry, what was the second one?
What does a good life mean to you?
Oh, the purpose of life is to love and be loved. Full stop. Like, I have great friends, I have a wonderful family, um, end relationships that don't work. You know, just uh, there are people out there that are worth your time, and
Hmm.
you. Those are the most important things I think you do in your life. Like, very few people will win a Nobel Prize, but most people will find love and give and receive it. So I think that's, for me, that's life. And I feel fortunate to have a great network of friends. I work in a community of game developers that, like, the best thing about going to GDC is running into people you worked with years ago that you have hold in high esteem. It's really talk about recharging the battery for game developers. That kind of those kinds of connections is one reason I would think it would be very hard to leave the industry and work in some other area of tech. So yeah, give love, receive love. That's my recipe to have a happy life and have enough money, but don't be obsessed with money. if money follows a great idea, awesome. But yeah, I think it's much more important the relationships in my life are what sustain me.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely something I'm coming to realize more as I'm getting older. Got married, having kids as well. And the other thing is, it's not a all situation. It's not you get an win a Nobel Prize, start some business that does really well, or have good meaningful relationships with your family, with some key friends as well. I'd say not too many. Just having like a select few that are really good friends that feel like extended family. It's not a matter of if you've got one, the other doesn't matter. So you get the Nobel Prize, uh, having a solid family, having people that you want to be with and they want to be with you is very meaningful. But then likewise, if you have the family, but again, not necessarily a Nobel Prize, but having a good career that you enjoy and that you strive for is also very good as well. So it's definitely understanding that both can work together and both can be complementary, and not going too much one way or the other, because like you say, you got to have enough money, because you could be so loving and be there for your family, but if you don't make enough money to really put food on the table properly and you're always struggling, then that's not a recipe for happiness either for you or the people around you.
For sure. And being fortunate to work in a job that you actually like, that's actually a tremendous privilege. Not many people get to do something as part of their participation in capitalism that they actually really are invested in and enjoy.
And
So,
go home and like they'll play like you'll play games when you can. Like there's so many people that'll do a job. It's like if you have an accountant in some regular generic accounting firm, they're not going home and doing accounts for fun. Not like, well, most of them aren't.
I hope not. That sounds, but not to crush other people's joy. If that's the thing, like if you want to look at the books and fall asleep to someone else's ledger, then by all means.
I mean, that's fine if you do, but you just statistically don't find that. I've never met an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor or any of these, more typical professions that outside of it, they are absorbing as much as they can, about it because they love it that much. Like they actually try and disconnect once they leave work.
Yeah, fair. Um, I think the most like game developers are probably academics, like who are really,
Yes.
um, especially the non-tenured ones, like that they're really driven by what they do.
Oh yeah, for sure. So that's all the questions I've got, Evan. I want to thank you for taking, almost 2.5 hours of your day to come onto the podcast today. It was really insightful, learning about, your work at, Frostbite, the Old Republic, Bioware, etc. And hopefully, everyone enjoyed the episode. Stay tuned for the next episode of FireDEV, and thank you, Evan, for coming on.
Oh, it was my pleasure, and I wish you all the success with the podcast. It's really a cool thing you have going, and I hope you can keep it going.
Thank you very much, and I hope so too as well. It's almost at the 1 year mark, and almost 52 episodes. This is episode number 40. I want to say 45, 46. This will be episode 46 when it goes live, because we just had 44. 45 is someone else, and 46 should be yours. So yeah, it's going well so far, and but it's only going well because there's people like you that do these, have these interesting jobs at these interesting companies that people want to hear about, but you can't generally get that sort of feedback and that sort of exposure on YouTube in general or on Spotify. And you're gracious enough to say yes, I'll come on the podcast. So thank you, Evan, for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye.